Hi guys, this is Matt and Bob, and today we are going to be analyzing one of Bob's games from the 4 NCL Online Congress. How are you doing today, Bob?
Yeah, I'm doing well, Matt. Thanks.
So this game, you were playing the white pieces, and we started out with a London, and here we see 2c5. What did you think about this move when you saw it?
Um, yeah, it's always the stressor for a London player because you have to think, and everybody's anti-London because you just shot out the moves, and you do have to think. It's I've got caught out with this in years because you get Queen B6, he threatens you on B2, and you end up sort of moving Queen C1, or and being very passive, and your position then goes to mush and
Yeah.
not very good. So um, I'm not saying I'm very good on this, but at least I've thought about, well, what do I do in C4? And I thought, well, I'm going to take and just see what it does and expect Queen A5 with a check offer. And then I thought, well, I'll offer a trade, then hang on to the pawn, won't take it, and then I'll just develop normally, and play for some advantage that way.
And what I really like about this opening is you're facing an anti-London system that's not the most common system, but you really handled it well, I thought, and you just stuck with your principles, kept developing, right? So I think at this point, you already probably have a small advantage. We see this pawn that's kind of backwards on d7, and in terms of development, you have two minor pieces out to black's one, bad bishop on c8 potentially. Everything's looking pretty good so far.
Yeah, you have to play something different. You can't be sticking the pawn on E3 and still playing for your triangle system because it's gone. Um, but you can play. I think you can play a different way.
Yeah, I think that's a good point too. A lot of players will tend to just play the same moves no matter what the opponent does, but it's good that you're able to shift gears here. And this is an important move e4 because it helps control the d5 square. So as we'll see in a couple moves, we'll fast forward a bit to this position where all of a sudden we start to look at this d pawn is the biggest weakness on the board for black, right? So if you compare the d6 pawn to the c2 pawn, which pawn is weaker out of the two?
Well, I'd say that the D6, there's no potential for support. At least C2 pawn could get support if it advances, and has got more pieces, potentially around to protect, I suppose.
Right. And then, so talk to me. I think this is a critical position. So talk to me, Bob, a little bit about the other imbalances in the position. What do you notice?
Um, well, I suppose my bishops are sort of a little bit more sort of range than black's bishops. Um, I'm slightly. I've got one more piece to develop. Black has got two. Um, there's a C file that black is half open C file that black will have access to. That could be potential danger for me. And I've got a king in the center which I need to get castled. Black's already castled. Black's got an active queen, but isn't doing a lot at the moment. So sorry, that's what I can see. What have I missed?
I think that's a really good summary. The one thing I would add is, what about the space?
Yeah, I've I feel I've got a bit more space. The black bishop can't come to any decent squares. He could sort of contest my bishop, but I've got more space on. Yeah, just all around. Yeah.
So what move here looks strong for white? Looking at this now.
I suppose not thinking about what I've played in the game. I know just developing my knight.
Yeah, knight d5 was played in the game.
Yeah, I think I probably need to play knight 92. I think would probably be better. I think. I don't know, but
I like knight e2. My top move is probably here queenside castle.
oh right, okay.
And the reason I like that is because it gets the king developed, and we put this immediate pressure on this d6 pawn. And
Right.
even though black could try this pawn storm over here, we also have a very quick attack with the g pawn
Mm.
hitting black's knight. So I think if you can kick this knight off of f6 and maybe then play knight d5, all of a sudden you have a pretty big attack coming at the black king. And you can tuck your king over on b1. And what can happen is sometimes this queen on a5 actually gets in the way of the pawn storm for black. Like maybe she needs to retreat back to get those pawns rolling, and black's attack looks a little bit slower than your attack.
Right. Okay. I think what I probably why I didn't castle queenside is I just was a bit bothered about the open C file, and um, I think that's probably what swayed me.
Well, I think this would
but
be reasonable too. Knight g to
yeah.
e2 and castle kingside.
Mm. Yeah, but the move I played in the game was not very good, and then took away any advantage, and just put me on the receiving end of attack, which is why I wanted to look at this game to sort of I just didn't play very well. So.
Yeah, so I think that's why this is a critical moment in my mind, because you had the initiative and you had the imbalance advantage, but after these trades, all of a sudden black is pretty safe, right? Like it's really hard to attack that pawn on d6. Black's getting developed more quickly, and I think it's kind of hard to claim any advantage now for white. This is probably close to equal at this point.
Mm.
So now let's fast forward a bit, because I like how you played the next few moves. Okay, so here f4. I think in the last few moves you've done a good job getting everything developed, and we can still focus on playing against this pawn here. So one thing that we have to do though is watch black's attack. Like black wants to play b4, right?
Mm.
There's a nice prophylactic move for white that you could play here. I'll give you a minute and try to think what it is. It's a prophylactic move that you can sort of set up a counter punch against this b4 idea. Then it helps protect your king as well.
Is that b3 and just retreating the bishop back forwards?
So b3, b4, retreat the bishop. That's very close. That's very close to what I had in mind.
Oh, you're being kind to me.
Well, the idea of bishop e1 followed by c4
right.
is what I want to play.
Okay.
But you have a sort of a waiting move here that you can play that improves the safety of the king.
Just moving the king across.
Yeah, king b1. So now let's say b4 is played. You can play bishop to e1.
Yeah.
And now let's give black an aggressive move a5. And here you can play c4. So what c4 is trying to do is you're shutting down the c file, and if black takes the pawn en passant, you're also sort of happy with that as well, because you could take back with the knight, helping to secure things in the center.
Okay.
So this is kind of a hard move to find. This is one of those sort of counter-attacking, defensive type moves. We're so used to just playing with our own plans in mind, but here we're kind of waiting with king b1. Like we know black wants b4. We're waiting, but we have this counter punch prepared, bishop e1 and c4.
Yeah, I was feeling uncomfortable, and I know we say we've got a bad position when you feel uncomfortable, but I just knew this attack was coming, and I thought, well, I think I can survive this, but I also need to push on the king side to try and do something there to distract. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of what I went for. But I think you're right. There's probably some sort of prophylaxis and safety
Yeah.
is a weakness of mine, as you know, that I'm trying to work on. So.
And I think part of that, too, that can help you think of this is black's attack is now a little bit faster than yours. So because that has shifted where the black attack is coming quicker, that can cue you into kind of looking for those prophylactic moves. Like, is there a way to slow black down or maybe counter their attack before going on with your own attack? But I think here, even though you felt a little uncomfortable, the position is still close to equal. Yeah, I saw in the notes, I think it was like half a pawn for black around this point. So here we see f4, b4, trade of bishops. I think that's good. Bishop d2. And we'll just go through these moves until kind of the next critical point. So we see a trade in the center. Knight d4. Yeah, and so I like what you're doing here, Bob. Because black had the quicker attack against your king, you are now swapping off pieces, and every piece you swap off kind of lowers black's attacking potential, right?
Yeah, no, that's right.
And here, I think the game is probably about equal. I don't think black has any advantage at this point. So you've taken it from an uncomfortable position, maybe down half a pawn according to the engine, played active with your minor pieces, went for trades, and now I think you're pretty much back to equality. H takes G, bishop takes. Yeah, and again, this is nice, Bob. You're playing very active. And look what happens in the end. So we have this rook and pawn endgame. Your rook is more active. So what black really needs to do here is probably try to trade rooks. They'll need to kind of be careful and calculate the king and pawn endgame, but you don't want a situation if you're playing black where your rook is sitting here, the white rook is somehow active, and you're just stuck defending everything, right?
Yeah, no, definitely. I knew I had to watch back rank, and I thought, well, I can get him amongst the pawns, but I just thought I had time. I missed in playing rook f7, which forces the trade. I thought he might play rook h7 to threaten the back rank, and then come back and defend or something. It was just an oversight, and kind of randomly ended up getting in a king and pawn endgame, which I can't say I'd really assessed properly because I just played my moves. So, but my feeling on looking at it, it didn't look. Well, it wasn't obviously losing. I needed to watch the two pawns in the middle. I just thought, well, I'll give it a go, get my king to the center, and try and defend. And I've got a slightly more majority on the queen side, so I thought it was survivable.
Mm-hmm. And I think even though you missed this idea of rook f7, there's really no way you can force an entry with the rook because black will play king g7 next. So, maybe this might be a little more precise. Black can still defend, and their position is pretty solid at this point. Like if rook d4, pawn a5 could be played. So I think it's okay to play rook f6, even though you missed rook f7, because I don't believe there was really any way that you could press a larger advantage here. So now
sorry, I was just going to say, at the level that I play at, it's these are always forced to a conclusion. It's very rare for someone to agree a draw. You're having to play this within the NCR, which is a 45-15. So you end up playing, these moves in 15 seconds, or as you're watching your clock run down. So you just whoever makes a blunder, I think. So.
And do you remember at this point how much time you and your opponent had on the clock?
I think we were down to be between 5 and 10 minutes. I can't remember.
Because the thing with the king and pawn endgame is we have to really be concrete. But when the time is low, there's just not enough time to do it because this is a very tricky endgame still. So let's say one side has 5 minutes here and the other side has 20. The side that has 20, I think there's a good chance that they might win this endgame. Just because there's so many little subtleties and ways to go wrong for both sides. And you have to really be careful and count all the variations out. So I think g4, g3. This looks good. You're blocking out the black king. But after d5, here you made a blunder with pawn to c3.
Yeah, I thought about this for a while and I overthought it, and I still made the wrong move because I didn't see that he could respond with b3. Or I didn't think about that. My thought on doing that is I wanted something, if he did do that, at least I could move forward and I had a protection, as I thought, on d4. But yeah, it doesn't work. So
like if here you could take and take.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the issue with b3 was with c3 was which move. Which move ended up being the issue?
Sorry, what do you mean, Matt?
So what's the strongest reply for black after c3?
Is that not b3 then in that case?
Well, I think b3. B takes c. Or a takes b. I think you're better in this position.
All right. Okay.
Because after pawn takes here, you have a lot of extra tempo with these pawns. I don't know which pawn is best to move first. Maybe this.
Right.
And if the king moves, you could play this. But these are connected pawns, so the black king is going to not be able to get at them. So the way that black should play this is trying to win a pawn. B takes c, b takes c, d takes e.
Right. Yeah. And then he can cover. Yeah. Then he's covered. He's got a backup central pawn, and he can easily cover my c pawn, so I don't get any advantage. So.
Yeah. Yeah. So these are tricky though. There's a lot to calculate. So in the game we had a5 was played, which returned the favor, which is very nice.
Yeah, I was pleased to see that. And that's what it is in these games. It's like Russian roulette in the playing these king and pawn with minutes on the clock, really.
But I think it also kind of highlights the importance of the endgame too, and saving a little bit of time in this format. Because these are 45 plus 15, is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So even though that feels like a very slow time control compared to what we're used to online, it's really advantageous to almost try to keep like at least 10 or 15 minutes for the end game, just in case. Because, yeah, like this is such a black and white position where one little slip up determines the game, whereas in the opening that doesn't really happen.
Yeah, true. You can, if you're going to speed a move, then speed it in the opening, I suppose, as long as it's not disastrous. Here, it would be disastrous to go wrong.
Yeah. And then here, I think the takeaway for your opponent is outside pass pawns are very dangerous. So after a3, there's no way you can go stop that pawn and get all the way back to, come protect the G file. So.
Yeah, and I think that shows the difference in the variation of having the outside, the A pawn versus the C pawn. The black king can cover it and push his own advantage. Whereas here, he's not going to stop that A pawn, or if he does, he's going to have to be too far from the centre. That hopefully I can mop up his two central pawns and then get over to that G pawn and then block and then pass. So.
Yeah, so I'll just show an example in case the viewers are wondering. So this pawn can start running. It's going to distract the black king. But then we can go take these other pawns. Oh, let me go this way.
I would have gone the E pawn first.
But, yeah, because I don't think this black king is anywhere close enough. So now the black king needs to be on this square to be able to draw. Not close enough. So we can box him out this way. And here we could even push the pawn first. That's fine. And we'll get our queen. So yeah, the outside pass pawn, always very valuable resource in the endgame.
And I think I think what it shows, I think also in this is we think we can calculate these things or we know them and we practice, but don't really practice them to do them at speed so that your hand almost goes and instinctively does it in the right way. And I think that's something I should bear in mind when I'm doing the practice, because you will be doing this under quite tight uh, time pressure
Hmm.
inevitably, because it is towards the end of the game, depending on what time control you're playing, obviously. But this is 15 seconds increment.
And I suppose that's another benefit of playing a lot of games. So, like we talk about in our Discord, we're always encouraging players, adult improvers especially, who really love to study more than play. We encourage them to play a lot of games because every endgame you encounter is another example to learn from. And a lot of games don't reach the endgame. So, like, let's say in Blitz, maybe you only reach the endgame 10% of the time. But if you're playing 50 Blitz games a month, that could be 5 really valuable endgames to learn from
Mm.
that come in practice, where you're kind of forced to play quickly and play.
Yeah, I think it's the speed thing as well. The system one, system two thinking is your intuition is just light years ahead of it. So if you already know that and you've drilled it, then even when you got down to the pawn, you're not king and pawn. I know it sounds trivial, but you could make a mistake if you're still calculating. And if you
Yeah.
just know it, then you'll just do it. There won't be any chance. And if you do that with more complex things, so I think that's a good way to practice. And the chess.com endgame trainer and other endgame trainers, just to drill those is quite good, so that you can do it under the time pressure.
Yeah, that's great advice. I really like the chess.com endgame trainer. The lines I've looked at, or the I don't know, modules, I guess, they're really good. And then the one thing that you did here, Bob, that I like a lot is you put your takeaways after your game. So I guess the viewers can't see it on the screen, but Bob analyzed this game very thoroughly. And at the end, he put a few takeaways, and I'll just read those off. So your takeaway number 1 was in the opening line. You're not sure if taking that c5 pawn was best or not, and you need to look at that line you mentioned. And then you said knight d5, let go of your advantage when all those trades occurred. So I agree with that. Those are really good takeaways. And then your number 2 is after the opening, you didn't really know how to play the position and should review the plans and ideas. I think that's good as well. And maybe looking at like kingside attacks in that position in particular, castle queen side, and go for the real quick attack. Play that out a little bit with the computer, see how it looked. And then your third one was your risk radar, and this is something that you've brought up before, kind of keeping an eye on the opponent's threats. And one idea that I had for Bob, and Bob, you probably haven't had a chance to really implement this yet, but in the slower games, every single move, think, what is my opponent going to play prior to releasing your move? And you can always make your move and then kind of revise what you think they will do. But something that I've noticed that I do in my games without really like consciously thinking about it, but I realize it when I talk to other players or students, is I'm always guessing what is their opponent going to do. And a lot of times I'll ask, like, what did you think your opponent would play? I'll say, well, I don't know. I was going for this plan with my knight and my pawn and going for this attack. What was your opponent's plan? No, I don't really know. So my advice for Bob was try to constantly be aware of what your opponent is going to move in terms of one single move, but also what's their long range plan. And then when they surprise you, hopefully you've built up enough practice with this that all the surprises you see are actually weaker moves or plans than what you had anticipated. So I think that would be kind of the goal for you, Bob, is really focus on their plans, and then when they surprise you, have it be a good surprise.
Yeah, let's have I can manage that. But I think even just being aware of that and trying to think about the forcing moves that they can do, the checks, the captures, the threats, just even starting to do that a bit more and examine it. I think I've already found a benefit in doing that, even if I'm not guessing I was playing the game the other day, and I knew something was coming, so I was gearing up and preparing myself for how I would respond to it, and I found that very helpful. It's always going to be a bit hit and miss. You might not spot some things, but you log it in the memory banks, and you're then aware, that in a certain game, F2 is weak or F7's weak, depending on where you're playing white or black, um, and your radar is just a bit more tuned. Sometimes just not aware, and it's playing more games, as you say, Matt, that gets you aware. So you might lose, but it's a learning experience, and it's another one to put in your radar, which then starts to flash red when you see these things. So I think part of it is just not aware, and all of this is just improving your awareness, which is what you say. So I completely agree.
Yeah, and I think it's an area in chess where even though there's a million resources out there now that weren't available 15, 20 years ago, it's an area of chess that's really hard to train. There's not like a good, threat trainer, or I don't know what it would even look like, but there should be something out there eventually where we can train this more easily.
I think sometimes the positions that I've seen, I think I shared one or two with you, which like positions, and they ask, is this move safe, or which of these moves would you prefer? That's somewhat artificial because it's already sort of alerting you.
Right.
I think what you need is to have that constant running in the background, which you're going, hang on, something's happening here. No one's going to point it. It's a bit like tactics. And I think, as you say, you just get more of that by game time, and it is hard to train, so you have to play. I think, which is what you advocate, and I agree. So,
and
that's why I'm in the July Play Challenge. So.
Yes, Bob's doing the July Play Challenge in our Discord. One of my favorite books is that chess exam book that we looked at in a couple of our classes, and the reason I like it is because it's always two parts. And part one is evaluate the position, and some of the positions are just equal. So it's like you don't always know. Like a trainer that had you say, is there a tactic here, yes or no, would actually be a really interesting trainer. Like, is this a critical position, yes or no? Like, that's what we should train on, because then we know where to spend our time. We know where to look for opponents' threats. If we can build that, is it the system 1 or system 2 that's more instinctive? System 1?
I don't know. I deliberately didn't say earlier because I can't remember.
if we can build the instinctive system to say critical or not, that's something that like grandmasters are obviously really good at. They know when to take their time, whereas most players like us, like they don't always know it's a critical move or not. All right, so I think, Bob, let's wrap up the video here. Thanks for watching, everyone. Please put your comments below. Let us know what you think of this video. There'll be a few links in the description too if you want to join ChessGoals. And please like and subscribe. Thanks for watching, everyone.